Captain Samara Ellis stepped into the cockpit of Flight VX-320, her uniform crisp, her 4 gold stripes gleaming under the cabin lights. But just minutes later, she was asked to leave. Not because of a technical issue, but for a reason no one dared to say out loud. She was a woman, and she was black. She thought it was just another case of everyday discrimination, but what she uncovered next would bring the entire airline to its knees. JFK International Airport, New York. 5:30 a.m. Samara Ellis stepped through the glass doors of the crew terminal, her uniform crisp, the 4 gold stripes on her sleeves catching the fluorescent light. She glanced at the flight control board. VX-320, London. Her name was still listed as captain. No changes. The moment she entered the cockpit, she sensed something was off. The usual chatter, the light-hearted exchanges about fuel levels and weather conditions, gone. Silence filled the space where there should have been routine. No one looked her in the eye. Samara set her flight bag down and glanced at the clock. On the instrument panel, 20 minutes until the crew briefing. She removed her cap, pulled her seat closer, and prepared to go over the pre-flight checks. Footsteps echoed in the narrow passageway. A man entered, the last person she expected to see here. Richard Vaughn, Regional Executive Director of the Airline. He had never once stepped into a cockpit before takeoff. His voice was flat, emotionless. There's been a last-minute change. You need to leave the cockpit. Samara looked up, one brow slightly raised. I'm the captain of this flight. Is there a problem? Vaughn didn't answer right away. He simply stood there, blank-faced, as if this were just another item on his checklist. This decision comes from management. Samara blinked. She'd heard of last-minute personnel changes before. Technical issues, paperwork errors, medical emergencies. But replacing a captain just before takeoff, with no explanation, that didn't happen. Through the cockpit window, she spotted first Officer David Clark standing outside, her co-pilot. He wasn't meeting her eyes. They already knew. A chill crept up her spine. If this is an internal review, I need official notification. It's not a review, just a personnel change. Vaughn's voice was clipped, his posture unyielding. Then he stepped aside, wordlessly ushering her out. No explanation, no justifiable reason. Samara drew in a slow breath. If she pushed back now, they could flag her as uncooperative. She had fought too hard, broken through too many barriers in this industry to know that challenging the system without proof would only destroy her faster. She stood, gripped the handle of her flight bag. She felt the weight of every gaze in the Wace cabin as she stepped out. Clark, the flight attendants, watching her but saying nothing. The cockpit door clicked shut behind her, a small sound, yet it echoed in her mind like a death sentence. For the first time in her career, Samara had been forced out of the cockpit, without cause. She glanced at her wristwatch. 5:42 a.m. She still had time. She would find the truth, and, when she did, they would wish they had never pushed her out. Samara thought this was just another act of racism, but she had no idea. She had just walked away from disaster, and she had just uncovered a scandal that could bring down the entire airline. 16 hours later, Samara sat on the sofa in her small Brooklyn apartment, eyes fixed on her laptop screen. She refreshed the aviation news site she followed religiously. Nothing unusual. She switched to a national news channel. A brief report flashed across the screen before cutting to the weather segment. Flight VX-320 from New York to London made an emergency return 1 hour after takeoff due to a technical issue. The airline confirmed no passengers were injured, and the flight landed safely back at JFK. No further details at this time. Samara's pulse pounded. EX322. Her flight. Some might call it a coincidence. But in aviation, Samara didn't believe in coincidences. Not when she had been pulled from the cockpit at the last minute without explanation. She grabbed her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Ethan Myers, a senior captain who had once been her mentor. He flew for the same airline but on a different route. The phone rang 3 times before Ethan answered. "Sam?" His voice carried a note of surprise. "What's going on?" "Ethan, have you heard anything about flight VX320? Silence. She heard him move, as if stepping away from a crowded space. "You shouldn't be asking about this over the phone." Samara sat up straight. "Ethan, what happened?" He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "The airline doesn't want this getting out, but I'll keep it simple. Cockpit pressurization failure. Just past the East Coast, the pressure alarm went off. The captain made the call to turn back." Samara's grip on the phone tightened. A failure serious enough to force an emergency. Landing? Exactly. But this isn't the first time. A beat of silence thudded in her chest. "What do you mean?" Ethan exhaled. "There have been multiple incidents like this over the past 6 months. Not on the same aircraft, but the same model." Samara's mind flashed to the airline's technical reports. Aerosky 787s. The new fleet they had been aggressively promoting for its reliability and efficiency. Then, why aren't they grounding them? A heavy sigh. "Because of the cost, Sam. You know how this works. They can't afford to have planes sitting idle for weeks. But the real problem isn't that they're ignoring it." Ethan stopped abruptly. Samara's skin prickled. "Then what? Is?" she pressed. A long pause. "They already knew." A cold wave rolled through her. She stared out the window at the twinkling city lights. Ethan wasn't the type to exaggerate. If he was saying this, it meant something serious was being covered up. "Ethan, who's flying these planes?" Another silence. Then, finally, "Pilots who don't have enough seniority to ask questions." Samara shut her eyes. They pulled her from the cockpit because they knew she would ask questions. They wanted someone who wouldn't notice or wouldn't dare to speak up. She replayed the news clip, watching the footage again. No mention of the exact failure. No official statement from the airline. Why were they being so quiet about something this serious? This wasn't just a mechanical issue. This was a cover-up. She set her phone down, her hands curling into fists. If Ethan was right, hundreds of flights were still operating with the same hidden danger as VX320. A bigger question clawed at her mind. Had the airline actually fixed these planes? Or were they gambling with people's lives? Samara knew one thing. If she kept digging, there would be no turning back. She drew in a deep breath, opened her laptop, and started searching. If they thought they could push her out and silence her, they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. 2 days later, Samara stood in the shadows of an underground parking garage 3 miles from JFK. No security cameras, no patrols. Just the flickering fluorescent lights overhead, casting long, jagged shadows across the concrete floor. She pulled, her coat tighter against the biting Atlantic wind seeping through the open ramp. A metal door groaned open. Marcus Reed stepped out. His navy blue coveralls were wrinkled, streaked with grease. His salt and pepper hair was disheveled, like he hadn't slept in days. Samara had never seen Marcus like this. "Thanks for meeting me." She kept her voice steady, her gaze locked onto his face. Marcus glanced around the garage, as if checking for unwanted eyes. Then he pulled her into a darker corner. "This is dangerous, Samara." His voice was low, edged with warning. "I couldn't say this over the phone, but you need to know the truth." Samara nodded. "I'm listening." Marcus took a long breath, as if weighing how much to reveal. "I reported the cockpit pressurization failures months ago." A chill prickled down her spine. "And?" Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "They dismissed it, called it a minor issue, nothing critical." But I checked again. "And I'm not the only one who saw it." Samara leaned in. "How many cases?" Marcus studied her for a moment, then pulled a folder from inside his jacket. "More than you think." She took the stack of papers and flipped through them. Flight data from the past 6 months. Every red mark on the chart represented a cockpit pressurization failure. She counted quickly. 12. 12 incidents. Same aircraft model. Her eyes dropped to a section at the bottom. A small underlined note in red ink. "Report modified per upper management directive. No further action required." Modified. The word burned off the page like an accusation. She looked up at Marcus. "They altered the maintenance records?" He nodded, exhaustion heavy in his eyes. "Not just altered. They falsified them." Rage flared in Samara's chest. If these records were real, the airline had knowingly covered up a lethal defect, one that could kill hundreds, maybe thousands of passengers. They knew. They knew. And they still let those planes fly. She met Marcus's gaze. "Why are you telling me this?" He gave a small, humorless smile. "Because I can't keep watching this happen." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "And because I know you won't stay quiet." Samara's grip tightened around the folder. He was right. The chill in the garage wasn't just from the wind, it was from the truth staring her in the face. If she was right, there were hundreds of flights in the air right now, at risk. And if she did nothing, the next one wouldn't make it back. She drew in a slow, steady breath. "Marcus, I won't let them bury this." Marcus nodded, then stepped back into the darkness. Samara stood still for a long moment, staring down at the evidence in her hands. She had just crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The next morning, Samara walked through the grand corridor of Sky Nova Airlines headquarters, the sharp click of her heels echoing off the marble floor. She had flown for this company for nearly 8 years, yet the hallway had never felt this long. She knew being summoned to upper management was never a good sign. Just a day ago, Marcus had handed her the evidence. Doctored records, concealed incidents, maintenance reports riddled with red flags that had been deliberately ignored. And now, she was here. She pushed open the door to the conference room. 4 people were waiting for her. At the center of the table sat Thomas Barrett, the regional executive, leaning back in his chair. To his left was Sarah Whitmore, head of human resources. To his right, Daniel Grayson, the airline's legal counsel. And in the corner, arms crossed, watching her closely, Richard Vaughn, the man who had pulled her from the cockpit. There was no chair for her. Samara kept her expression unreadable. "Have a seat, Captain Ellis." Barrett gestured to the only chair across from him. She didn't sit. "I assume I wasn't called here to discuss my flight schedule." Her voice was steady as her gaze swept over the room. Barrett didn't smile. "We received reports that you accessed internal documents beyond your clearance." Samara didn't blink. "I reviewed maintenance records for the fleet I was assigned." 2. Is that a problem?" Grayson, the legal counsel, laced his fingers together on the table. "Maintenance records are restricted to authorized engineering personnel. A pilot accessing them, without proper clearance, is a violation of company security policy. Samara gave a slow nod. So, I'm being reprimanded for doing my job. Sarah Whitmore cleared her throat and slid a document across the table. Samara, this isn't personal. We just need to ensure protocols are followed. You're a talented pilot, but we need you to respect company policy. Samara glanced down. An official letter. Indefinite suspension. She looked up, locking eyes with Barrett. So this is how the company handles people who ask questions? Barrett leaned back in his chair, his voice dropping to a quieter, more deliberate tone. No one else is asking questions, Captain Ellis. Just you. A warning. A threat. Anger burned in Samara's chest. They weren't even trying to deny anything. They just wanted her to shut up. Her eyes flicked to Vaughn. He remained still, unreadable. A part of her wanted to shout, to call them out right here, right now. But she knew better. The smartest way to fight back wasn't with anger. It was with strategy. She took a slow breath and nodded. Crystal clear. She picked up the letter and carefully tucked it into her bag. I'll be leaving now. Barrett studied her, as if trying to gauge whether she was truly backing down. I hope you reconsider, Captain Ellis. Samara raised an eyebrow. I won't. She turned and strode out of the room. The door clicked shut behind her. She didn't stop. She didn't look back. There wasn't a single ounce of hesitation in her step. But in her mind, a plan was already taking shape. If they thought they could silence her, they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. 48 hours after suspension, Samara sat in a small Brooklyn cafe, tucked away in a quiet corner by the window. She wasn't the kind of person who got nervous easily, but for the first time in years, her heart pounded in a way that felt wrong. She pulled her laptop closer, eyes locked on the email she had just sent. 2. Federal Aviation Administration. Safety Inspection Division Subject. Urgent report on Sky Nova Airlines violations. Dear FAA, my name is Captain Samara Ellis of Sky Nova Airlines, and I have evidence that the company has falsified maintenance records and concealed critical pressurization system failures on the AeroSky 787 fleet. Have obtained internal documents confirming that warnings from maintenance crews were ignored and altered to evade FAA scrutiny. I am urging the FAA to launch an immediate investigation before a catastrophic accident occurs. I am prepared to provide all evidence and a list of witnesses. Time is running out. She stared at the last sentence. Time is running out. It wasn't just a warning. It was the truth. Every day those planes stayed in the air. Thousands of lives were at risk. Samara hit send. She took a sip of coffee. Cold. Now, all she could do was wait. But for how long? She wasn't the only one who was restless. Across the cafe, Marcus sat 3 tables away, silent, occasionally glancing her way. He had seen the company bury problems before. When she had called to tell him she had filed a formal complaint, he had only let out a dry, humorless laugh. You think the FAA will just jump in and investigate? Samara had said nothing. Sky Nova has deep ties with the FAA. They have lawyers ready for situations like this. They'll stall, they'll grease the right wheels, and by the time anyone gets involved, the company will have already wiped everything clean. Samara tightened her grip on her coffee cup. I can't just sit back. Marcus held her gaze for a long moment, then lowered his voice. You're not the kind of person who sits back. That's why I'm helping you. 3 days later, Samara stood at her desk, staring at her laptop screen. No response. She had sent 3 emails, Called twice. Nothing. Her jaw clenched as she reopened her browser, searching for recent FAA investigations. Most took 6 months to a year. She didn't have 6 months. A plane could go down tomorrow, or the day after. Then her phone rang. She grabbed it instantly. Ellis. The voice on the other end was low, almost a whisper. "You don't know me, but I work at the FAA. I read your email." Samara's fingers tightened around the phone. "And? You're right about Sky Nova. But I need to be honest with you. They have people inside the FAA. Your complaint has been stalled. They're making sure it doesn't move forward anytime soon." A sharp, burning anger rose in her chest. "You're telling me the FAA knows about this and is doing nothing?" "I'm telling you that if you're waiting for them, nothing will happen." There was something in his voice, something that made her pause. "Why are you telling me this?" A long silence. Then, finally, "Because I have family who fly on. Those planes too." The line went dead. Samara threw her phone onto the desk, pressing her hands against the chair's armrest. The FAA was compromised. The airline was playing a dirtier game than she had imagined. But she wasn't stopping here. She needed a new plan. If they refused to act, she would bring the truth to light herself. 48 Hours after the FAA call, Samara didn't waste time. She had suspected Sky Nova might have influence over the FAA, but hearing it from an insider confirmed just how deep the control ran. They weren't just stalling the investigation. They were buying time. Time to erase evidence, silence witnesses, and paint her as nothing more than a disgruntled employee with a vendetta. If the FAA wouldn't act, she needed another way. She needed to bring this story into the light. 3D. Next morning. A cafe in Manhattan, Sarah Liu was 4 minutes late. She arrived in a black leather jacket, a thin scarf wrapped loosely around her neck, her long dark hair tied back in a high ponytail. She moved with the urgency of someone who was always chasing a breaking story. Samara stood as Sarah approached. Ellis. Sarah extended a hand, gripping hers firmly. "I read your email. This story is big." Samara nodded and slid a folder across the table. "These are the internal maintenance records I obtained from a company engineer. They show that Sky Nova falsified data on the Aero Sky 787's pressurization system. And this," she pushed another sheet forward, "is a list of witnesses. People who know but haven't spoken up." Sarah flipped through the documents. When she reached the incident reports on the Aero Sky 787, she looked up. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Samara met her gaze, unwavering. "More sure than I've ever been about anything." 3 days later, the story breaks. It was everywhere. The New York Times, the Washington Post, Aviation Weekly, exposing Sky Nova. Airline falsified maintenance records, putting passengers at risk. The news spread like wildfire. Social media exploded. Frequent Sky Nova passengers demanded answers. The company's stock plummeted 12% in the first 24 hours. But Sky Nova didn't stay silent. Within a day, the airline struck back. They released an official statement calling Samara's allegations false, describing her as a disgruntled former employee suspended for violating company policy. Major financial news outlets quickly shifted their headlines. Skinova insiders refute claims. Former employee accused of spreading false information. Social media comments began to divide. If she was suspended for misconduct, how can we trust what she's saying? This is just a bitter ex-employee trying to take down the company. Samara scrolled through the news on her phone, her expression unreadable. She had expected this. Skynova had been ready for war, but they had underestimated her, because she had been ready too. 3 days after the scandal, broke Samara sat in a small office, the glow of her laptop screen reflecting off her face. The news was everywhere. Front pages of the New York Times, CNN, and Aviation Weekly all carried the same explosive headline, "Skynova under fire. FAA launches formal investigation." She scrolled through the articles. According to leaked documents, Skynova Airlines is accused of falsifying maintenance records for its Aerosky 787 fleet, concealing critical cockpit pressurization failures that could endanger passengers. The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, has initiated a full-scale investigation to determine the severity of the issue. Skynova's stock plummeted 28% within 48 hours. Passengers and crew members speak out, "We should never have been flying on these planes." Samara stared at the words. They couldn't bury it this time. Too much evidence. Too much public pressure. She took a sip of coffee, eyes never leaving the screen. But this fight wasn't over. Meanwhile, Skynova Airlines headquarters, 32nd floor conference room, Thomas Barrett, regional executive, slammed his fist on the table. How the hell did this blow up so fast? Around the table, senior executives sat in silence, checking their phones, reading the latest headlines. Richard Vaughn, the man who had pulled Samara from the cockpit, narrowed his eyes at the screen in front of him. "We had control over the FAA. How the hell did they launch an investigation?" Sarah Whitmore, head of HR, exhaled sharply. "Public pressure is mounting. We can't keep calling this misinformation." Barrett took a deep breath, struggling to keep his composure. "We can control the FAA, but we can't control the press," a voice spoke from the corner of the room. "Then we control Samara Ellis." All eyes turned to Daniel Grayson, the company's legal counsel. Barrett frowned. "What are you suggesting?" Grayson tapped his fingers against the table. "We file a lawsuit against her for defamation. Pressure her to retract her statement. And if necessary, we leak certain unfavorable details about her." A long silence. Then Vaughn smirked. "She put us in this mess. If we destroy her credibility, the story loses its weight." Barrett nodded. "Do it." 3 hours later, Samara's lawyer's office. Samara was reading emails when her phone rang. She picked up. Ellis, the voice on the other end, was her younger sister, Zoe, a corporate attorney. Her tone was tense. "Sam, they're suing you." Samara closed her eyes for a second. She saw this coming. Defamation, intentional harm to corporate reputation. They want you to retract everything or they'll take this to court. Zoe hesitated before lowering her voice. "But Sam, that's not the worst part." Samara opened her eyes. "What else?" Zoe took a slow breath. "They're digging into your past, looking for anything they can use against you. They want to ruin your name before you can bring them down." Samara set her coffee cup down, eyes drifting toward the window. Exactly as expected. They'd done this before. But what they didn't know was, she was ready for this too. She was ready for one final blow. One more strike, and the whole system would collapse. 3 weeks after the lawsuit, FAA headquarters, Washington, D.C. The main hall was packed. Dozens of journalists from CNN, the New York Times, Aviation Weekly, crowded together, cameras flashing, microphones raised high. Samara Ellis stood at the podium in the FAA's press conference room. This wasn't just a hearing, this was a public indictment. Beside her, FAA Director Mark Henderson spoke with a level of firmness no one had ever heard from him before. After a 3-week comprehensive investigation, the FAA has confirmed that Sky Nova Airlines engaged in severe violations of aviation safety standards. Specifically, the airline falsified maintenance records and concealed technical failures that endangered the lives of thousands of passengers. The cameras flashed wildly. Due to the gravity of these violations, the FAA is revoking Sky Nova Airlines' operating license. A shockwave rippled through the room. The FAA had never revoked the license of a major commercial airline before. Sky Nova was finished. A journalist raised a hand. "Mr. Henderson, what about Sky Nova's leadership? Will they be held accountable?" Henderson nodded and passed the microphone to the representative from the U.S. Department of Justice. A man in a gray suit stepped forward, his voice cold, matter-of-fact. "We are proceeding with criminal charges against former Sky Nova executives, including ex-CEO David Langford, Regional Executive Thomas Barrett, and Legal Counsel Daniel Grayson. Charges include fraud, obstruction of a federal investigation, and witness intimidation." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Samara closed her eyes for a second, taking a deep breath. Justice had won. FAA gives the floor to Samara. Henderson turned to her, offering a small, knowing smile. "Captain Ellis, would you like to say a few words?" Samara stepped forward. The past few months had changed her life forever, from a pilot forced out of the cockpit to the woman who brought down an empire. She looked toward the front row where Marcus Reed sat. Beside him was Zoe, her sister. A little further down, she spotted Ethan Myers, the first to warn her, and Sarah Liu, the journalist who had helped expose the truth. They had all bet on the truth, and they had won. She turned to the sea of cameras. "The Sky Nova scandal is not just a story about greed," she said, her voice clear, unwavering. "It is a reminder that in aviation, there is no room for lies. No one has the right to put profit over human lives." She paused, letting the words sink in. Then, she looked straight into the lens. "And, most importantly, no one has the right to tell you that you don't belong here." Applause erupted. 2 months later, in the Skyo Boeing 787 soared through the clouds, leaving JFK Airport behind, bound for the west. Samara sat in the captain's seat, her hand resting lightly on the controls, feeling the hum of the aircraft beneath her fingertips. She was home. She pressed the intercom, her voice calm, steady over the radio. Aero Atlantic 207, cruising at 35,000 feet. All systems normal. Beside her, her first officer, Tasha Williams, watched her closely, absorbing every movement, every decision. After a moment, Tasha hesitated before speaking. "Captain Ellis, I just wanted to say what you did with Sky Nova, it inspired me." Samara turned to her, seeing a reflection of herself 10 years ago. A young pilot, full of ambition, constantly questioned for her gender, for her skin color. She smiled, then spoke slowly. "The sky belongs to all of us." Below, the earth shrank into the distance. Ahead, the sky stretched infinitely. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Martin Luther King Jr., Samara Ellis didn't just fight for herself. She fought for the truth. She fought to ensure that no one would have to risk their lives for corporate greed and negligence, because in aviation, one lie can kill hundreds. But courage can save generations. Thank you for following this journey. If Samara's story inspired you, if you believe that truth deserves to be heard, that justice cannot be bought. Hit subscribe to keep following the stories that change the world. The sky belongs to all of us, and so does your voice.